Hello, thanks for coming. We're going to get started because we only have 50 minutes and we want to try to take as much advantage as we can of the opportunity of having these three guests who've so generously agreed to come and help us out today. My name is John Muse. I'm an assistant professor in the English department and the Committee on Theater and Performance Studies. I'm also one of the job placement officers in English, so I think a lot about questions that revolve around how to get a job or how to prepare yourself early in your career so that later in your career as a graduate student, you'll be the sort of person who someone might want to give a job to. Let me first introduce our panelists. These will be quick introductions, as I said, in the interests of time. Immediately to my left is Ann Harris, who is university professor and associate professor of art and art history, as well as the director of women's studies at DePaul University in Indiana. Anne is a medievalist who teaches in the art history department there, and she got her PhD in medieval art history from U of C in 1999. Her teaching and research interests include stained glass and medieval popular culture, female patronage of moral education, gender and Arthurian legends, monsters, and medieval ecology. To her left is Corinne Scheiner, who is Maytag Associate Professor and Chair of Comparative Literature at Colorado College. Corinne got her PhD from UChicago in 2000 in Comparative Lit, and she's worked at Colorado College for the 12 years since then. Her research and publications focus on translation studies, Samuel Beckett, Vladimir Nabokov, and the practice and teaching of comparative literature. And her most recent project examines the underpinnings of philosophy in works by David Foster Wallace. Finally, Jacob Schiff is assistant professor of politics at Oberlin College, and he earned his PhD in political science at UChicago in 2010 and joined the department at Oberlin just 6 months ago in July of 2012. So all of this is very fresh in his mind. Before that, he was holding various visiting scholar positions at the University of Toronto, his alma mater. He works on contemporary political theory, and his first book, Burdens of Political Responsibility, is forthcoming from Cambridge University Press. Obviously, work-life balance is not the focus of this panel, but it did occur to us when we first met each other that all three of our panelists are also parents. So when you chat with them later at the reception, if you have questions about what it's like to be a parent and teach at a liberal arts school, feel free to chat with them then, or it might come up during our conversation today. I've also been asked to mention that your program includes this sheet on which you can take notes about the session if you want, or if you have another piece of paper. We are going to try to focus as much as we can on concrete steps that you can take away from the session that feel productive and useful to you so that this isn't just a one-off event. The plan for our 50 minutes is, first, we're going to spend about 10 minutes allowing the panelists to introduce life at liberal arts colleges by answering two simple questions. First, what's their favorite thing about working in a liberal arts environment? And second, what's the biggest misconception about those environments? Hopefully that'll take about 10 minutes. Then we'll spend about a half an hour where the panelists will field questions, mostly from me, about how to prepare to make yourself into the sort of person that a liberal arts school might be interested in, and more specific questions about what to do and how to prepare in the application process and interview process for liberal arts schools. Then we should have 10 minutes or a little more at the end to take questions from the audience. But if anything really urgent comes up in the middle of the discussion, feel free to raise your hand. We might be able to take a question now and then.
Plenty of seats in the front, as always.
And yes, there are some seats in the front. Thanks. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and dive in, and if I could ask Anne to introduce her favorite things about her job.
Sure. Well, just seeing you all here, I'm so encouraged for the field, and I'm very encouraged for small liberal arts colleges. I think the main advantage for me is interdisciplinarity. That's something that, of course, University of Chicago taught me to love with its fabulous workshops. And the fact that you're in proximity because the numbers are smaller. I consistently bring in geologists into my classes. I have some of my best friends are economists, this kind of thing, and I'm a humanities person. So the interdisciplinarity for me is the biggest advantage in terms of intellectual liveliness and a really tremendous benefit. In terms of the misconception, I don't know what your conceptions or misconceptions are, but I can tell you mine, which was that I thought liberal arts was basically teaching without graduate students, and it's not. It's much more liberal arts colleges are very intentional communities. They were, from the minute of their foundation in the 19th century, far from the madding crowd. So that's, I think, why the majority of them are in these small rural communities. A very concrete thing I can say about misconceptions is every small liberal arts college has its own character. Check out the website. I can sit here and tell you what Oberlin students are like, what DePauw students are like, maybe even what Colorado College students are like. Really, really research the website to find out how this community conceptualizes of itself. It's not just teaching without graduate students. It's an intentional communities for undergraduates that seeks to develop a character. Yes, half of that is marketing, but the other half of that is that 19th century kind of far from the madding crowd idea.
I'm assuming you can all hear me really well and moved this as far away from me as possible. So it's interesting, Ann and I were here in grad school together, but we had not spoken before this, and yet I have very similar thoughts. I'll take them in a slightly different direction. Sort of the biggest misconception is that it is undergraduate teaching without graduate students in a few ways. One, that somehow this is a bad thing, right? That what we've all trained for is the graduate workshop, and that if we're not doing that, somehow we have failed, right? How could we ever have a high-level intellectual conversation with a group of undergrads of the level of the sort we have in our graduate seminars? Every class I teach is a seminar, and I would venture to put any of my top majors up against any beginning graduate student any day. I've brought them with me to conferences. They do very, very well, and it's wonderful. It's these wonderful seminars all the time. So the idea that somehow it's dumbing it down is not true, and that also that it's just undergraduate teaching. Every search committee I have served on, every interview I have been a part of, the phrase that will be common to all of our unique learning communities is teacher-scholar, and it's all about the hyphen, right? It's all about the relationship of your teaching to your scholarship and your scholarship to your teaching. And that leads into then the best part about being at a liberal arts college. I come from an interdisciplinary program. The interdisciplinarity is amazing. I would expand that to say relationships are what make being at a liberal arts college so amazing. First, relationships with students. When you have these wonderful, bright, eager students in your very small classes where you get to know them and talk to them, you actually can teach your research and improve your research and take your research into new directions, because as you produce information, you should also be able to disseminate it. And if you can't disseminate knowledge, you probably can't produce knowledge. And that's probably the best part from the student side. And then the relationships with faculty, not funnily enough, but my best friend is an economist. And we know one another, and you're the only one. You're gonna be the only one in a big research institution too, right, who does what you do, but it might feel a little more so at a small place. So you have to build those connections, and that also takes your research into exciting areas, not just in terms of teaching. Jacob?
For me, I mean, mostly I would just echo everything that's been said about the advantages of a liberal arts college, because those are all of the things that I would have said anyhow. With the exception, and I guess this is building a little bit on something Corinne said, is that it really has improved. I think it improves my research, and it also makes me a lot less obsessive about it, because there just isn't the same kind of time. Plenty of time, but it's not. Anyhow, for me, the biggest misconception was that, for all its differences from being in a large research university, and they are different. The biggest misconception was that it was going to be this like weird alien thing that I wouldn't know how to navigate, because I came from the University of Chicago and all I really knew was research, and didn't teach as much probably as a lot of people at a lot of other places. But it's really not. I mean, you get there and you have your research and you have your teaching, and for me it's my favorite kind of teaching because it's small classes. And there's tons of student engagement, and you'll learn a lot from them, at least as much as they learn from you, I think.
Great. Thanks, guys. That's super helpful as a way to kick things off. It makes us all a little jealous, I think. I thought we might start very broadly and ask, I don't know if this is a helpful question or not. I wanted to ask, what sorts of people do you think thrive at liberal arts schools? Or what habits of mind, what kinds of personalities you think tend to fit in, and taking for granted that Anne's right, that each school is a radically different place. But to the extent you can generalize.
I would say a community, somebody who enjoys being a member of a community, and I mean that in two different ways. You'll stand out from the stack of applicants, if we can talk realistically, right? I'm on the medievalist search for English, and we had 175 applicants. So what makes you stand out there right away? Of course, your brilliant syllabi, your publications, that you can offer some kind of writing, which Little Red Schoolhouse will serve you well. But the thing that makes somebody pop are kind of ideas for being a member of a community. Now, the technical word for this is service, but think of these, again, 2,500 students in a cornfield, 2,500 students at the foothills of a mountain, wherever they are. What kind of thing can you bring there that can help build that community? Now, this can be a studies program, right? Look at the website. Do they have film studies? Is it new? Can you contribute some ideas to it? Do they have Jewish studies? Do they have environmental fellowships? Whatever. Look for ways that you can, I think, people who are interested in contributing to an intentional community. That's the briefest way I can put it. And I say this having been a total hermit at, well, not a total hermit thanks to Kurt's parties, but having been a quasi-hermit at University of Chicago. But once I got there, I was like, I did have that sense of thriving, like, hey, this is cool, and women's studies is this exciting field, and now environmental fellows, and that kind of movement. So if you see yourself as a member, somebody who wants to be a member of an intentional community, and then the other thing I'd say. No, I'll leave it at there for that, because that's another thing. Yeah.
When John prefaced his remarks, he said how you can make yourself the kind of person that liberal arts colleges want to hire. You have to actually want to do this. I know the market is really tough, but you really need to ask yourself, is this where I want to be? And I don't think you should have a knee-jerk reaction, which is, I don't want to be there because it's not what I have been used to, right? Jacob's story is a perfect example. But the people who succeed are people who either want it or once they get there realize, oh yeah, I do want this, right? There isn't one type of person who does well or doesn't. Not everyone is the best team player, and some people are more hermit-like than others. But in terms of that really nuts and bolts, we get 250, 300 applicants for every search I have been a part of. I was shocked. I was convinced that it would be much lower. And I was also convinced on my first search committee that I could immediately dismiss half of them for either not really working in the field or not being quite, no. It's shocking how many really smart, really talented people are out there, and yet you have search committees at these small colleges, and when we meet for our first meeting as a committee, the same 15 names kind of float to the top on everyone's list. So what are these ephemeral qualities? If everybody's the smartest, everyone's the best, everyone's dissertation is the most important research in the field ever to happen, right? I mean, your advisors here, I will say, I read a lot of advisor letters from University of Chicago professors. They can write a good letter, right? I mean, they will sell you. And you will sell you in your cover letter, but it is some sort of knowledge, saying, oh, I look forward to teaching graduate seminars. We don't have graduate seminars, right? So none of you would make such a mistake. But knowing the institution, right, and it is, you couldn't possibly know what our vibe is, but recognizing that weird thing called fit is actually something. It's not an excuse for we all think your boots are really cool, so we want to hire you, right? It's an actual thing, and it's very, very hard to describe, but a big part of it is what Anne's talking about. We are a small place. We want people who recognize that they're going to have to talk to other people about what they do in a way that other people can understand it, and who actually care what other people are doing and can contribute to all of these all-college initiatives, interdisciplinary programs. I'm a chair of an interdisciplinary program. For every research we do at the college, there is a representative from a cognate department who sits on the committee whose job is to say, aside from what your department needs, what does this person contribute to the college as a whole? So I'm going to echo what Anne said, maybe from a slightly different perspective, and really underscore that it's not for everyone. The people who are not successful, who come and don't stay, either by choice or not, it maybe wasn't the right thing for them. They didn't thrive or decide, wow, I didn't think I would like this, and I do.
Right. So I guess picking up on what Corinne said and my own experience was that I didn't know that I wanted to be a liberal arts college at all. My dad was a professor at the University of Toronto. I came into this thinking I wanted to be a professor at a large research institution, and ended up at Oberlin and love it more than I could have imagined. And I think what I would say about thriving in a liberal arts college is you got to be open. You got to be open-minded to the kinds of things it turns out you might want to do that you hadn't thought about. You also have to be, it helps to be open, in terms of your willingness to engage with other disciplines. They do tend to be fairly interdisciplinary communities. When I came to Oberlin, one of the first things I was told is, we're a department of 13. Most of us have most of our friends outside of the department. And it's true, which means you get to have a lot of really interesting conversations with a lot of really different sorts of thinkers and scholars. But it does mean, it just means being open, intellectually, pedagogically, in terms of what you want from your career.
And in terms of strategizing this for your career plans, the websites are a real resource for you. Liberal arts colleges are very competitive amongst each other for students, and so they will tell you every glorious thing about themselves on the website, but that's where you find out about these initiatives. That's where you find out about these special programs, and those are the things that, again, make you rise to the top of that pool is, oh, wait, oh, wow, they've got, we're trying to really get this environmental fellows thing off the ground, and they've got some ecology stuff they've done in this one article that they're talking about. So I would say use those websites, and God knows, University of Chicago, you guys are good researchers, right? So research the website.
And lest you're freaking out because you are towards the end of your career and you say, oh my God, I haven't done anything interdisciplinary, no one will ever look at me. We're just asking you to express interest,
Yeah.
right? You don't have to be an expert, right? You learn things, and it's one of the great things about being at a liberal arts college is you can experiment, be open in different ways, and go down paths you might not envision yourself going. So if that's not where you've been, and we all know, right? Also, committees know, we know what University of Chicago is like, right? We know the teaching opportunities for graduate students are not, falling from the sky like manna, and there's enough for everybody to have 2 portions on a Saturday, but we know what you're working within, but you need to express a desire like, I'm interested in X, right? That gets you a long way, right? We also will mine your CVs for any indication that even if you don't indicate an interest in one of these things about the college, that you have them, but I'll talk about this more later, but search committees are tired. We are overworked, and I know that means nothing when you are out there and you have no job, and you're thinking, yeah, but you have a job. Yeah, we have jobs that are really, really busy, and so make it easy for us. Tell me, oh, I work in this area, but I'm really interested in these other things I noticed that you have going on in your vibrant community, right? Do you think I'm gonna go look and see, well, did they have any experience in that? No, I'm assuming I take you at your word. You are interested. I will follow up in an interview. Well, what does your interest, consist? So,
I thought it might be helpful to figure out where in your graduate careers some of you are. It might help us tailor our comments a little bit. How many of you are in a master's program right now? Okay, almost half, at least half. How many of you are in the first 4 years of a PhD program? Okay, and how many of you are later in a PhD program than that? Okay, awesome. Thanks, that's super helpful.
I noticed a divide, heavily weighted, down by your thoughts.
Is that the groom side or the bride?
Homeric simile.
So let's take for granted that a student is someone who thinks she might be interested in working at a liberal arts school or wants to have that possibility open to her later, and wants to find ways early in a graduate program to build up a series of experiences that would help down the road, to beef up teaching experiences, to find ways to talk about teaching, to also to learn how to speak to a broad range of people about your work. What would you recommend people do even before they're actually applying to the school or researching a particular school to put themselves in a good position? I mean, I think it goes without saying that you should be deeply involved with the Center for Teaching and Learning at UChicago whenever you can, and that's really whatever kind of school you want to work at. So I can say that first. But what else do you think good candidates, what kinds of opportunities have they taken advantage of?
I think you should, one thing I took advantage of here were the workshops, right? I mean, if we're talking about intentional communities, interdisciplinarity, if you're not already involved with some of these workshops, those are fantastic, right? They'll actually give you a little taste of the kinds of conversations you might end up needing to have in your career at a liberal arts college. If you're taking the one on modern France and you're reading something by a historian, well, this is like talking to your colleague from history, at work. So those are specific to University of Chicago. I was trying to think of things here. The more specific you can be, which means you actually have to have specific things to talk about. All right, so ideally, you can teach a standalone class. My day here, that was, 2 a year through this TAVE teaching fellowship that you could apply across the whole of the humanities and get. So I don't know how many of those are around. But if you have done work as a teaching assistant, don't downplay it. Well, I was just a teaching assistant. Well, if that was the opportunity, University of Chicago provided me the opportunity to assist in this. And then specifics. Right? Don't tell me, oh, I'm a good leader of discussion. Give me an example, right? And then tell me how you know it to be true. And this is the case with doing teaching portfolios. With most of us are not going to read with 300 applications out of the gate, right? That's at the end. And if we don't ask for something, don't send it. We're not going to read it. So you've just saved yourself a little. Nowadays, everything's online, so it's not postage anymore, and photocopying. But specifics, right? Everyone, that is that hyphen, right? If you've done any research on applying to liberal arts colleges, everything, first of all, lead with teaching, we're teaching institutions, and then segue to your research. I know that sounds really simplistic, but flipping the order of those paragraphs on your cover letter sends a very clear message that you understand that those two pillars are equally important at a liberal arts institution. Then actually finding opportunities to talk about. If you didn't get to do a TA-ship, go give a lecture in someone's class on your topic of expertise. Right? Teaching occurs in a lot of different places. It doesn't have to be you with a standalone class responsible for all components of the class. I mean, that's great if you've done that. But any teaching, any kind of something that you can talk about concretely is helpful. In those situations, because general statements of I enjoy seminars, okay, right? Why? Right? Give me something specific and tell me specifically what you have done to support whatever statement you're offering.
I would open a file on your computer or your iPad of great assignments, great writing assignments, either some that you've seen that you'd be wanting to put into practice, or some that you yourselves have experienced as a student, or that you've designed yourselves. I mean, and we'll often on our search committee be like, oh yeah, that's the person that does the Tolkien role-playing. I made that up, but something like that. So oftentimes we'll remember you by that cool assignment or by that specific example. So I think just kind of starting to keep a storehouse, and then you don't want to flood people necessarily, but to be able to talk in a smooth way about ways you're going to get students engaged. I mean, you have to do that with your scholarship anyway, but this is on the teaching level. So I would just keep that little file open on your computer. And then workshops, I think, you're already training. UFC gives you training for small liberal arts college through those workshops, because you know how to speak interdisciplinarily, you know how to organize a reading list interdisciplinarily, and some of my happiest moments at DePaul, I organized a pre-post-colonial reading group. It totally helped me with my research. There were about 3 of us that were interested in some of the theory. We took it all in different directions, but I did a reading group totally based on the workshop model at University of Chicago, and we swap work, we have writing groups, all this kind of thing. So I think you can talk about yourself in terms of the content of your work, but you also have structures that you're already active in, workshops, assignments, that you can be ready to put into action at a small liberal arts college.
I want to underscore one thing Anne said. So you've had no opportunities to teach for whatever reason in any capacity. Imagine, right? It's great if you can say, I did this, but you can also say, I want to do this. I will do this, right? As Anne's saying, exciting assignments that you've thought of, even if you haven't tried them out, right? We try things out all the time. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Big trade secret. So I would also encourage you to do that as well. Like, this is the time where, of course, the job description is going to tell you, we need you to teach X, Y, and Z. Respond to that. I can teach these, and here's how. But then there's room, look at the website, right? How is the curriculum structured? What sorts of things are people teaching? And that's where you wow us. Like, I would look forward to offering this super exciting class that nobody's ever thought of before. And people say, ooh, remember super exciting class guy? Let's interview him.
Yeah,
right? That
and
sounds
not just
cool.
that, but I would be interested in teaching a totally bread and butter course that you teach every year, but in this really exciting way.
Exactly.
Or from a perspective that isn't usually done, or with a series of assignments that sort of blow your mind to think about how they unfold or whatever, right?
Exactly.
I would second Anne's point about starting documents on your computer to take notes about teaching. It could be assignments. It could also be innovative courses that you think of, or just the idea for a course, a question that would make a great course. Because later, they'll tell you that you need sample syllabi. You can use the sample syllabus from the one standalone course that you've taught, and you probably should do that. But what's much better is to develop an archive of a dozen potential courses you'd be interested in teaching that aren't fully developed, but that you can describe and that you can talk about. What's the question behind this course? What's the arc of this course? Why would it be exciting? How would I get students involved in a particular question? And those are hard to sit down one night and write a dozen of them, but much easier if you build up an archive of them over the time that you're in graduate school.
The only thing I'd want to add to that is I found it helpful anyhow to think in pretty broad terms when you're thinking about this kind of thing. What do you want your classroom to be like? How do you want it to go? What do you want the atmosphere to be like? How do you want students to feel in it? It sort of falls into the rubric of this thing that they asked for called teaching philosophy, which I thought was really irritating until I actually sat down to write one and found it really useful. Because it gets you to think in really sort of a kind of pedagogical, philosophical way about what you want to do in the classroom. And I think even if you don't have that much teaching experience, having thought about that will come through.
I've heard before from liberal arts professors that it's important when you talk about teaching to take your students seriously. And I know that might sound unsurprising or like an obvious thing, like of course you should take your students seriously. But does that resonate with any of you?
Well, there's a big difference between juniors and seniors and freshmen and sophomores, I would say, in the liberal arts setting. You really, I don't know if I'd say the same thing for graduate students. I think we're all, graduate students are graduate students in some ways. But it's those 4 years are very, very crucial. So in terms of taking them seriously, I take them, a lot of liberal arts colleges have first-year seminars. You get that high concentration of fresh teenhood. That can be kind of difficult, but that's a real test of your teaching, and if you can get those kids engaged in From the Holy Land to Graceland, which was my course on visual cultures of pilgrimage, then you can get them, then good things happen after that. So take them seriously. I think this is more like once you're at the liberal arts college, you'll start to see differences between certainly a freshman and a senior are two entirely different animals. And again, different schools, Oberlin, super smart lefty kids, and St. Olaf, high activism, and DePaul, very social, and, there's also, I don't have one for Colorado College. Ski. So you take them, you learn their character, and you learn the kind of character that is developed over there. But I think the one thing I will say, small liberal arts colleges nurture student initiative. So it's very easy for me to take students seriously because they've been in an environment where kind of all of their ideas have a ton of support. They're not in line behind graduate students. Not for studios, not for professor time, not for anything. So in many ways, they've got a ton of initiative. And I'm not sure that I'm answering your question, but that's what makes it easy and pleasant. And I want to echo what's been said about student relationships. That's really quite incredible. That's a total benefit, just pure benefit of humanity that comes out of these. So a high student initiative.
I mean, and I think in part I was responding to Jacob's point that you want to think about what your students want to get out of the experience. That's a sort of student-driven account of your teaching, right? That takes seriously that your students might want to get something out of the class, right? And that the point of the class is not to demonstrate your own brilliance, right? But to be an educational experience for someone. And just that small shift, which seems obvious, I think can make a big difference in how you talk about your teaching. I don't know if that...
Well, what's the sage on the stage moving to I forget the name of the new model, but the new model is what it is at Liberal Arts College, right? So if you have visions of yourself standing up, delivering a lecture, and students' rapt attention, that's not going to fly, right? Because they are there, this is their experience. They're paying a lot of money, even at the discounted rate with financial support. It is a good amount of money for them to be there, and they own that experience. And at where I work, we have no graduate teaching assistants. Most liberal arts colleges don't. Everyone is a full member of the faculty. Most of us are full-time members of the faculty. We don't have a whole lot of contingent faculty where I work. And that's who they're there for, not because I'm the most brilliant scholar in the world, and even if I am, they want to talk, and they want to be a part of it, and that can't be sort of annoying, right? We teach on this weird system called the block plan. All of my classes are 3.5 weeks long, and they meet every day for 3 hours a day. So I do a 3-hour seminar every day. I couldn't lecture if I wanted. Right, even I, who can talk for a good amount of time, and I am not talking for 3 hours every day for 18 days straight. It's not happening, and nor do I want to, and nor do the students. And I think that's how I would take that question of taking the students seriously. Is it's about an experience. It's about being in the room with you, whether it's your first-year students who you're keeping out of the general population. Hopefully they won't learn some bad habits before you release them. That's how I approach our first-year seminar, which I teach every year. Or if it's your upper class, majors who are already committed to your discipline, this is a process, and that is why they're there. And of course, I give lecturettes. I have knowledge to disseminate, but that realizing that it's not a one-man show, that it's a group experience.
I guess the only thing I would add to that is taking your students seriously. Certainly, I think what that means varies by year, but in a lot of ways it varies by student, it varies by classroom dynamic. I mean, for me, taking your students seriously is just being responsive. Trying to figure out how to get to this one over here who can't shut up, which is different from trying to get to this one over here who's really smart but won't say anything, right? Or having, I have a thesis student right now who's really smart but completely all over the place. And how to sort of respond to that kind of engagement and that kind of seriousness in a way that sort of directs it somewhere. For me, that's taking students seriously. It's sort of trying to get to them.
And I'll give a specific example, since I recommended you do the same. I teach a course on translation theory. This is my field of expertise, and read an article that I've read a million times before. I've written on it, and a student read something that was sort of the opposite of how I had always read that, right? So instead of sort of being, well, I must of course be right because this is my area of expertise, I actually thought about what she had to say and realized, I'm not sure I have a response. And so I spent most of my afternoon and evening figuring out, well, how would I respond to her? And that ended up being a whole new avenue of research for me, because I actually took the question seriously. And how that might translate then a little later stage, I know we're talking about early things to prep yourself, but so you get a campus interview, you're gonna have to give a job talk. You're teaching a class, don't be fooled. Don't be fooled that this is a University of Chicago, lots of specialists sitting in the audience who are going to say, well, what about so-and-so's obscure article from blah, blah, blah that you don't mention? No. You are not only demonstrating to us your skill as a researcher, your knowledge of your field, you're showing us how you teach. When you get up there, you are teaching me something about your field, and the way you present it, the way you handle the Q&A, which is not an add-on, but is in many ways immensely more important, because our conversations in class are discussions, not lectures, right? So you're nervous, oh my God, I'm gonna stand up for all these people and talk. Don't worry about it. We're not actually that concerned. We're waiting to ask you questions and see how you field them. We're also looking, can you speak in a way that is not so jargon laden that you've lost all but the one other person who at one time maybe read something kind of sort of in your field. So don't be fooled. It's all related.
And then once you're in, just quickly, this kind of wonderful shining hope is that small liberal arts colleges actually encourage a lot of faculty-student research, and the Mellon Foundation oversees, I think, all three of our institutions. They have huge, huge initiatives, huge grants, and so this idea of taking students seriously can go on. Basically, you've got a wonderful, focused relationship on a kid that's really, really worth it, and I've done 3 now different summer student stipends that have resulted in publications, new courses, stuff like that. So it's easy to take your students seriously. There's good support to do so.
Do you have any tips about figuring out how to talk about or present your research in the ways that Corinne's talking about so that a broad range of people would understand it, so that a smart undergraduate student might be engaged in it? We don't get a lot of experience doing that. And in fact, if you speak in, too direct or too simple a ways, some profs here might scoff, right? So I, for instance, got a lot out of trying to explain my dissertation project to my grandmother, and who's super smart but didn't know the first thing about it. And when I was writing my job materials, I came up with a couple of really great lines that I wouldn't have otherwise used because I had to explain it to her, right? And it's interesting because most of the people reading those materials were folks who knew a lot about what I was talking about, but they appreciated the fact that they could see I was speaking to a broad range of people. Do you know how to cultivate those skills?
Yeah.
Because they seem really important in a liberal arts community.
I think write the talk you're going to give and then give it to a smart general audience. I had all of my friends up to my apartment on the north side of Chicago, fed them breakfast, and gave them my job talk. Because none of my cohort was very small in comparative literature, so they weren't people in comparative literature, and by virtue of being in comparative literature, no one was working on the same thing anyway. And then you take the questions like, well, you said this, I don't think I know what that means, and you get really good feedback. So that's one really easy thing to do, is write the talk that you would give because that's what you know and that's what you've been trained to do, but then give it to the audience, or a version of the audience you're going to have to give it to, and take their responses seriously, right? That's when you fill in the gaps that are not gaps to you. You're an expert in this field, right? We all know you're experts. In your field. That's why we're bringing you to interview at our schools, right? That's why you've been at one of the top graduate schools in the country, right? We know you are smart. We know you have interesting, exciting research, but if you can't explain it to me, how on earth could you explain it to my students? So that's the first, I would say, give the talk. What did you do? He's the only one who did this recently.
Well, I did. I did a practice talk here, which was, I'm a political theorist, so it was political science. It's mostly political theorists, a couple of other friends who came out of some sort of grudging sense of duty, I assume. And then I gave it again when I was in Toronto to a group of my parents' friends. Many of whom are academics of some kind, none of whom are political scientists. There was a criminologist and a few psychologists and a psychoanalyst and a bunch of other people. And what that really highlighted to me is that I think, unlike at a research university, you're not giving an academic talk. You're kind of not. You're going, at least the way I did it was I went and said, here's what I'm working on, here's what I'm interested in, here's how it works. Get rid of the jargon. Nobody cares. I don't think it would have impressed anybody at where I gave my talk. It just doesn't, because they really want to know. They want to know that you can talk to undergraduates. And in fact, when I gave my talk at Oberlin, and it's standard practice there, students come to the talk, and they get
All
the first
of our schools.
and they get the first crack at asking questions. So the faculty really do get to see you in as close to a classroom setting as you're going to get, except not even because you're actually on a stage giving a talk, which you'll never do again.
Except at conferences, which you'll keep going to.
And I'll say, students are likely, I mean, we actively solicit student input on candidates when they come to campus. So there's not a student on the search committee reading files, but every candidate teaches a class, every candidate gives a job talk. Students they usually have breakfast or lunch with our majors. And that input, I mean, I was just on a search where the faculty were sort of leaning one way, and we got the student response. It was like, oh, nope, not hiring this person. We're going to the other person that we also liked and the students were on board with. The other piece, since I'm mentoring a postdoctoral fellow from Berkeley who we hired last year, as she's been going on the job market, and had her give a practice job talk. And what became really apparent is you have to tell us what's at stake. We don't know your field. Every political theorist is going to know what's at stake in Jacob's talk when he begins talking. And we forget that other people don't. We know what's at stake, and so we don't even, that's so obvious. Why would I need to tell you? If you can lay out for me at the beginning of your talk, this is why what I do matters. This is what is at stake and what I am talking about. And then ideally give me the most interesting example of your work. Right? There's a lot of things I've been doing, and all of them center on this, but here is really exciting, sexy stuff, can grab your attention, but I have to know what's at stake.
Yeah, and so far this advice, which has all been amazing, has focused on your job talk or campus visit. These very same questions can help you write really great materials, like a cover letter, right? Where you're really trying to do the same things, to talk about the widest possible stakes of your project, to use great examples to do so, to talk about your teaching in super specific ways, right? Since we only have 10 or 15 minutes left, I wanted to get questions from the audience.
How would you suggest, like, coming from a university like Chicago and applying to something kind of more rural areas? This is kind of a different culture. I guess what is the line of saying things that sound pretentious versus saying things like,
Don't mention the roads. No, I'm trying to think. It's such an interesting question. You as a candidate, what are you saying about the... Because you'll get the campus tour, you'll get,
No,
you know...
but there are two things in your question. One is, almost everyone at the institution you are applying to probably went to a graduate institution like yours. I wasn't sure I was going to give the example, but I will. It was not someone from the University of Chicago. We were interviewing, and the person proceeded to inform me, perhaps I had not heard of Jacques Derrida. Really? Because I've been living under a rock in Colorado here, and if you had looked at my CV and noticed my publications on said Jack, maybe I do know a little something. So anyway, the one thing is you are writing to peers, right? The bulk, and that wouldn't have necessarily been true even when Anne and I were out on the market. But let's be honest, jobs are few and far between. The top graduate schools graduate a lot of people, and they all need jobs. So you're generally going to be writing for people who went to a graduate institution like yours. So I wouldn't worry about the pretension of sort of, oh, you know, these hicks out there will know me, which I don't think that's what you were saying. But the second piece of it is, we are looking, are you serious about coming here? Is this a blast? I'm applying for every single job in the world that could even remotely relate to what I am doing. And some people argue you should do that, and some will say be focused and only apply for a few. That's not really the topic at hand. But making clear that this isn't, oh yes, I guess I'll go live in rural, you know, nowhere for a couple years until I get a job somewhere real. You know, that would be good. But you'd probably want to say something about the location, because we do wonder about that.
Yeah.
Like, are you going to come to Colorado Springs and want to leave immediately? We actually are an urban campus. I mean, as much as 500,000 people can be urban, but we are in the middle of downtown Colorado Springs. So we're not sort of surrounded by cornfields or anything, but you know, we're still kind of in the middle of nowhere. The nearest liberal arts college is 500 miles away. But there are other institutions in town. But even something as simple as that, you know, saying, I'm excited about X, Y, or Z, you know, something about, if you recognize that your primary community is the college's community, that probably deals with it. But if you have a reason to be there, right? Like, oh, you know, I've been out there on vacation and it's beautiful. I mean, that may sound stupid. That might be better for a face-to-face thing. But if you have any connection there, oh, you know, so-and-so is a visiting professor there and spoke so highly of it, right? That you've indicated an interest, a real interest in being there.
That you know where it is on the map. I mean,
Yeah.
you'll meet both professors, both kinds. You'll meet the kind that are pining for good Thai food and the kind that totally love it here. I mean, you'll meet them when you're on campus and so forth. But I think, just remember, everybody comes from somewhere else at a small liberal arts college. That's the nature of the beast. That's what I love about it.
I could, I think, speak to this also. So Oberlin, I don't know how many of you know this. Oberlin, Ohio is a town of about 8,000 people on 4.5 square miles. It is small. Before that, I lived in Chicago and Toronto. As it turns out, I'm completely a small town boy at heart. I did not know that, so it works great. But it is small, and you know, basically half the town population is college students and faculty. And you know, there is a question for somebody like me who's only been at big institutions, who's only lived at big cities. You know, is he going to stick around in this place that's like smaller than the neighborhood he grew up in, basically? Mm-hmm. And I mean, for me, and like if there is a genuine angle to play that suggests your interest in being there, play it. I mean, for me, I'm also a musician. And when I, at one point, was thinking about a music career, and if I wanted to go into music, wanted to go to Oberlin for the conservatory. So that, you know, if you can tell some kind of story like that, tell it. Because a lot of these places, I think it will not be, I think sometimes you'll have to work to convince them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know some of my students who are applying worry that they'll sound fawning or that they're, you know, being disingenuous or something. Yeah. But no, you're not.
And you can only reveal so much. I mean, all the interview rules, you know, we can't ask you about your intentions. We can't ask you about your family. We can't ask you about whether you're married or kids or whatever. So,
where else are you applying?
Or where else you're, no,
Where
so you don't have to give away your enthusiasm or your disdain, depending on how you feel. I say, find out kind of who you are and see if the place feels good. All of these liberal arts colleges are in small, quirky towns because they're filled with all these over-enthusiastic academics who, you know, have extra energies.
Right, so I mean, if you are interested in mountain climbing and we are at the base of Pikes Peak, perhaps you might mention that. Apparently we have a lot of fly fishing going on among my colleagues. I have no interest and would not have written about it. But it probably goes without saying, but I will say it, if you went to a liberal arts college,
Say that, yeah.
talk about it, right? We'll find it in the CV, but you know, that's, I mean, and again, if you didn't go to a liberal arts college, it's not that we won't interview you, but you already are ahead of the game because you know the beast, right? From firsthand experience.
Could we take another question?
Okay.
Yeah,
From
sure.
the PhD side.
So I have maybe not really, but also a question about UC's reputation. And several people have told me that just teaching UC students is not enough if you're applying to a liberal arts school, that you should also show that you can teach other kinds of communities.
That's
You
great,
learn,
but that's, you know, your experiences are what they are, right? I mean, how could you not teach your own students, right? That's sort of your captive audience. I wouldn't spend a lot of my time, I mean, obviously, you should get as many diverse teaching experiences as possible, but that's where that using some creative license of, you know, I've had a wonderful experience teaching my courses here. I look forward to working with diverse student group, right? And that's where you read the website. Is this a school that is, we're in a military community, right? We don't happen to, but perhaps we have a large preponderance of, retired military who are going back to school, right? That's where you draw on what are their particular groups that school goes to. And the other thing I want to say is some of our schools, like mine, have a long history with the University of Chicago. So it actually works in your favor, right? They know this place. Lots of people have come from there. They're psyched, right? They see a Chicago app in the pile, and it's not just one of the top graduate schools. It's University of Chicago. When we have a sea of maroon when we, robe up at the beginning of the year.
You could say the
all
same
over
thing
the
about
campus.
Oberlin, no, Jacob?
Sorry?
There's also a lot of similarities between Oberlin and UChicago.
There are. And
Weirdly.
Sorry?
Weirdly, maybe, but
Weirdly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I would say, this didn't occur to me actually until I started prepping for my interview, you teach at a liberal arts college, right? It's a University of Chicago is primarily a graduate institution. The students you are teaching are in a college. And so it took me a while to figure that out, but once I did, I was like, oh, in fact, the only teaching experience I have is liberal arts college teaching experience, which probably won't be true at any other grad institution I can think of,
Also-
which is worth mentioning.
Get yourselves observed teaching and get a professor to write about it.
Oh, yeah, I meant to say this earlier. Another thing you can do early is figure out how to make sure someone can write at least one person can write a strong teaching letter for you. That means getting someone who might already be writing a letter for you to observe your teaching, maybe more than once. It also means for all of your letter writers that you can give them as much material as possible about your teaching, right? You're putting together a teaching portfolio, great, share it with them. Share your teaching reviews with them, especially if they're strong. Give them all of your innovative syllabi, right? So that they can say something about your teaching as well, even if they haven't observed all of your classes.
Can I ask a question just about that?
Yeah.
So one of our professors was saying that something they're looking for in the teaching letter is like someone who's observed your growth over time. Is that true? I mean, it's a very specific question, but she had the impression that at liberal arts colleges it wasn't just enough to have someone listen to you once, that you needed someone who you developed a relation with over time.
The truth is you'll keep growing at the small liberal arts college, so I don't think we're looking for a finished product. We're looking for that open mind, student engagement thing. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
We're looking for potential, and even at your third year review is diagnostic, not summative. So we're still hoping, right? I mean, by tenure, you've given us 6 years. We should now we will watch you grow over time, right? And I would say it's not always the people who have the longest CV in the teaching area who we want to interview, because maybe it's a lot of the same courses and it's, French 101 and they haven't told me they've done it in any exciting or interesting way. So, I'm interested in, and search committees are interested in that diamond in the rough if that's the case, right? So I would say, let's say you for some reason had zero opportunity to teach here, then give a sample class, give a mock class and get someone to write about it, right? I mean, at this point, you can teach in a real environment or a fake one, but we're still gonna see you do it.
I know most of this information is geared towards those kind of exiting the PhD program, but for those of us that are wrapping up our master's right now and kind of approaching an interim year between transitioning from master's to PhD, are there any opportunities at liberal arts schools that would offer maybe some like temporary lecturer positions or any way to get involved before, or any way to give a lecture there or just to stay involved in that community before actually to make the best use of time for that year?
We have a few members of the faculty, either with terminal masters, right, MFAs, who are studio artists, and then we have a few language classes. That's where our contingent faculty mostly are, and they are, it's like one or two people, and usually it's because they're somebody's spouse or something like that. So you certainly could look and see if there are actual teaching opportunities in those, but of course what the admissions office is selling is, these are full members of the faculty who have PhDs, so that doesn't usually happen. In terms of giving a talk though, right, that's where you rely on your network, right? I mean, who do you know? I mean, that's who I brought my first few years. I brought all my friends to Colorado College to give talks. Some were in grad school, some were in, early in their careers, but hey, I got to see them. We had some good pockets of money that I could tap into. And so yeah, reach out. Hey, I'd love to come give a talk. You guys come cheap, right? Your honorarium is, hey, I can crash on your floor, all right? So, yeah, that would be the best way, is to reach out to people you know and sort of say, hey, I'd love to come and talk about what I'm working on.
Also,
Guys, we're basically out of time. Could we take maybe one more question? Yeah, in the back with the blue shirt? Yeah, why not?
I'm an older student who returned to school late night, and I want to know if age is likely to be a factor that would make it very difficult to get a job. I think you want to know.
I can tell you at DePauw, we had a photographer who was not fresh out, and I think, I mean, it's the innovation. We're not allowed to look at that. So, but realistically, I mean, I can tell you that we looked at and hired somebody who was not, fresh out of a MFA program in that instance. I just think what I myself, when I'm on search committees, don't look at birth dates, or I'll look at the degree date, but then, if the degree is relatively fresh, that's really, I look more at degree date than birth date. That's what I can say.
Everything is about the narrative, and I don't just say that because my degree's in comparative literature, but it's all about the story that you can tell, right? I mean, so I don't know what your story is, but if it's a compelling story, that's more important than sort of where you are in life. I mean, we've recently our religion department hired someone who'd had a whole career as a lawyer and went back and got a PhD in religion, and his narrative was really compelling, sort of what led him to go back to school. And we imagined, and we have been right, that it would translate to really interesting research and really interesting classroom teaching, because he brought a different perspective. You also have no idea, right? You have no idea who else is applying, and you have no idea what the search committee, sometimes they have no idea of what they want until the applications roll in. And I know that's so frustrating to say that to you all, but it is true. And you have no idea what the department makeup is. Maybe they hired a whole spate of junior people, all of whom are 25, and they're like, ooh, awesome. In addition to having this great, file, you also are not 25. That's a bonus, right? And of course, as Ann said, we would never say that because that's illegal, and we wouldn't ask you about it. But, what people are thinking, I don't know. What other people are
It is the whole person. That's all I want to say.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm sorry that our narrative has come to an end, but would you join me in thanking our panelists?